Yay, we're live.
Here we are. We're going live. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, Jen. Hello.
Welcome.
Hi. So, welcome, everybody, to the Pop Up Chat with Summer and Jen with the Life, Love, and Money Show. And we do this occasionally. We like to come on and talk about something that we feel is really important that might be helpful for you. So, today we're going to talk about feeling disrespected and setting boundaries. Right, Jen?
Yes. I love this topic because I think this happens to all of us. This happens probably more than you are even consciously aware of. And so I love some of the examples that we're going to be talking about, because when we describe it and when you hear it, it might make you go, oh, I didn't realize. Yeah. You'll know that that's been happening to you, but you may not have recognized that that was a form of disrespect.
Totally. Oh my gosh. We have a really great clip to start this whole conversation out with. And I think that, once we start this out with this clip, it's actually Mel Robbins talking about this. And this is pretty cool because this will help us jumpstart and get right into the conversation and some of the things that we want to tell you about, setting boundaries, if you're feeling disrespected, what that looks like, and what she has to say about it, and what we have to say about it. So let's just jump right into this, Jen. You want to roll it?
Yep, let's go.
All
there
right.
are 5 common forms of disrespect that I want you to start calling out. When you call it out, not only are you respecting yourself, but you're also going to get a little boost of confidence. Number 1, that friend who's constantly running late. You know the one. They're always 15 minutes late. I'm sorry. They're disrespecting your time. Call it out. Number 2, backhanded compliments aren't compliments at all. They're a form of disrespect, so call it out. Number 3, pressure. Pressure to do things that you don't feel like doing. No is a complete sentence. If somebody keeps pressuring you, call it out. It's disrespect. 4, somebody who's constantly on their phone as you're talking, that's not multitasking. That's a form of disrespect. Call it out. And number 5, the person that talks over you. They are disrespecting you when they interrupt you and talk over you. No one's going to respect you until you respect yourself enough to call it out.
Oh my gosh. Boom, 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 boom.
I know me too. I know 4 and 5 are my triggers.
I know they are too, because you talked about these with me before behind the scenes. So I know what your triggers are.
Yeah. 4 and 5, especially 5. Do not do it. Do not do it. Because I will shut down, and I'm going to remind you to go back to this video and read number 5. If you want to talk over me, don't ask me any questions, because you obviously don't want to hear my answer. So just stop. Stop the madness.
Stop the madness. So have any of you out there, what was her first one? What was the first one again?
Oh, the friend. Oh, that's another. You know what? All 5 of them are. But number one was the friend that's constantly showing up late.
That's right. The friend that's constantly showing up late. So that was number 1. Ooh, showing up late.
Not at all.
And let me tell you, this woman over here, she is all about being on time. And it's important.
All about time.
Oh, it is important.
To my detriment.
Okay, so we just showed a clip. If you're missing any of this, this is about feeling disrespected and also setting your boundaries and what that looks like. So what Mel Robbins did there in that video is she pointed out the 5 factors that, if these are 5 factors that where somebody could be disrespecting you. So it's showing up late, it's backhanded compliments, it's pressure. If somebody's pressuring you to do something that you don't want to do, it's somebody who's on the phone while you're talking to them. Oh my gosh, right? And they're just like, yeah, I hear you. Yeah, got it. So
that reminds me of Chris Rock. No, get out of here. You don't say. You remember that one? Yeah. Not really listening to his girl. Just filling it with like comments. Yeah. What was number 3?
Number 3 was somebody's putting pressure on you. Like if somebody continues to ask you to do something or putting pressure on you, and you really are like feeling uncomfortable about that, say step off. Know your boundaries. But here's the thing. The last one is talking over you, right? And so Jen knows like that is one of her biggest triggers. And I like that you said that, Jen, because here's the thing. that was not covered in that video, which I think is very important, are the next steps, right?
Yeah.
And so the next step means action. But before we go there, let's go to the first thing. First things first, she said, let them know, let them know, let them know if that's happening, right? Well, that's easier said than done, because it's nice to say those things, but if you don't give at least some steps to how to do that, and all of our steps are going to be a little different, but to give those steps is really important, because we may have been conditioned for so many years to accept that type of behavior, or to be understanding of that, or to be flexible to that, that it may be really tough to set up those boundaries, to even maybe recognize that that's happening.
Yeah.
And it could be something that maybe, as a woman, that's the way you're raised. Maybe it was a cultural thing. I know I've been there before. So, there's cultural issues here. So setting boundaries. So I think the next step would be, 1, recognize what's happening. 2, being able to set those boundaries. But before you are able to set those boundaries, you want to really know what boundary you're trying to set. You want to be clear about that boundary, because you might be like, hey, step off, don't be on the phone while I'm talking to you. I want you to do A, B, and C. But first of all, know what boundary it is. Know how you're going to say it. Know what's going to cause a rift. And maybe that's okay, but maybe that's not okay. So how intentional are you being with the way that you say something, right? The way that you set that up in regards to setting your boundaries. How are you communicating what you want to do? How are you communicating this to a friend, to a coworker, to a family member? What does that look like? How are you recognizing this? And you know what we always talk about, Jen? Values.
Core values.
Core values, right?
Yes.
I think when you're aware of your own personal values and your value, it makes such a difference when it comes to setting boundaries. Because let me just put this out there. If you were unaware of what your values are, or you weren't clear about your values or your own personal values, meaning your intellectual value, meaning your social value, your spiritual value. If you didn't know that or aren't familiar with those things, are you going to be able to set a boundary very well?
No, because you don't even know where that boundary is supposed to be.
Exactly. And here's the thing about boundaries. They can be rigid and they can be flexible. So you can set a very rigid boundary, or if that's something based on a value that you're like, oh, okay, that's like my 10th value, right? So I can be a little bit more flexible. But if it's those first 3 main core values that you are just like all about and very, very, intentional about, you're not going to be, it's going to be a bit more rigid in regards to how you set those boundaries. But if it's a value that's kind of lower on your list and you know that you can be a bit more flexible, then you're going to be flexible, but you're going to have that awareness about your values, right?
Absolutely. One of the other things I've been thinking about as well is sometimes I think it's also the other person that you're interacting with completely oblivious. I think there's many times when people are either lacking self-awareness or mindfulness of, you, the other person. And I've had conversations where like that person didn't even realize that they were doing that. And it's so crazy to me, because I know that's something that I try to practice and try to look at, the other side and whatnot. But when, aside from us having those boundaries, as well as understanding like, what am I trying to be intentional with, and all those different things, I think we also have to, communicate to the other person, okay, this is how I'm feeling. This is what it's feeling like for me. Because that person probably doesn't even know. And I know that's such a hard conversation to have.
Yeah.
Because it's uncomfortable. But, there's so many different things that can be done where we have to communicate that this is how you're feeling about it. But then you also have to do your own work and homework and understanding what your values are, like Summer's been talking about. Because if you don't know what those values are, how are you going to know where to put that boundary? And then otherwise you're going to be stuck in this cycle of feeling, oh, I don't like this. And it's like, I don't like it when they do that. And it's never a fun place to be in. It feels so cringy. I hate that word, but it feels so cringy. And it also feels like yucky. You know, I know these are some technical terms, cringy and yucky.
Hey, you know what? They're real. They're real, honest terms. And if you feel that way and you don't feel good, hey, that's going to be really important for you to be aware of in regards to like your own, like how you can be intentional and how you feel, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm totally okay with cringy and icky or yucky. So
yeah. if you're like, you know, familiar with these terms, not the cringy and yucky, but like the low vibrational frequency, that is so low on that totem pole. You know, not only is it, you know, so low down here, but it's like, it doesn't feel good. You're not showing up how you want to feel. You're having that internal struggle and conversation in your head of like, oh, I don't know if I should go meet up with them. I've seen people do, but that's another layer of not being able to say no. Because I've seen people where, you know, there's that other saying, like we show people how to treat us. So if you keep allowing to be disrespected, they're not realized. Some may and may not. Depends if you're dealing with a manipulative, narcissistic person. Did I say that right? Narcissistic person? No. Yeah, it depends if you're dealing with that kind of thing. That's a whole different thing. But you know, if those are the kind of personalities that you're dealing with, of course, it's going to keep you in that cycle of feeling cringy and yucky. And it's also up to us to have that respect for ourselves. We demand it of others, but we have to do it for ourselves. And if we're not even putting that boundary, if we're not saying no to those things that we don't want to participate in, whether it's like I'm buckling under pressure, which was like number 3, and you know, just allowing those other things to happen, it's like you're not respecting yourself.
Yeah, I fully agree. As you were talking too, I think there's a boundary scale, right? So there's, you know, the scale from 0 to 10, right? It could be like a Likert scale. It could be a 0 to 10 scale. It can be. So if you're looking at that scale and you're saying, okay, I'm really rigid, it's a 10, like, yeah, that's a no-go. But before you ever get there, you got to be understanding of what are your intellectual boundaries? What are your physical boundaries? Physical, your being. Because there are people that can impose on your being.
Yeah.
And you need to know what your boundary is in regards to your scale, 0 to 10. Like if somebody does this, or somebody touches your shoulder, if somebody pats you on the head, like what is your boundary? What's your no-go? What's your 10? What's your 5? What's your 0? What are you okay with? Right. But you don't know that unless you think to yourself, what is my value in regards to my intellectual value? What's my value in relation to my spiritual value? What's my value in relation to my physical worth and value? So, I mean, that's really important. What are your values? How do you value yourself? And I love what you said there, Jen. We show people how to treat us. And we show people how to treat us because many times that has become cyclical, or that has become learned behavior. And so the people that are imposing those things potentially are the people that have also taught you those things. Yeah. They're aligning with their own, or they're just imposing their own personal judgment and values and boundary setting onto you. But if you feel uncomfortable and you're mindful and you're following your intuition and saying, this just doesn't feel comfortable, this isn't okay, this is feeling irregular and uncomfortable and doesn't align with my values, it's okay to shift that perspective. It's okay to change your way of understanding your boundaries than what you were taught. That is okay. But to establish those, that's where it becomes difficult. And that's why I think it's really important, because of what we are taught, what we are conditioned to believe or do or not do. That's why it's important to start recognizing what is your value? What are your boundaries? How would you set up a boundary? How would you impose a boundary if somebody is overstepping, or imposing upon you? What does that look like for you? And what are your values? What are those values? How do you feel about yourself in regards to emotional, spiritual, physical, intellectual, even like you say, your social worth? How is somebody maybe like, let's say, for instance, let's give a for instance here. Say, for
Love
instance,
these.
you're online, right? And you're on LinkedIn or you're on Instagram, and somebody starts overstepping your boundaries and says something that's rude or obnoxious or just right out like annoying or whatever it is, like just inappropriate, right?
Yeah.
And what do? How do you set up those boundaries? And have you ever gone through that in your mind, Jen, and thought, okay, how am I going to look? Because this is a social platform. This is a social setting. So how do I respond to this person in a way that is fair and understanding, and yet you've got clear boundaries?
Oh, I don't even know how many times often. In fact, I was just talking about this last night at dinner, and there was an incident. I want to say it was 2 years ago now, almost, maybe a little bit more than 2 years, and the person was commenting on a post that I had made and pretty much saying I'm racist and something like that. And then it just kind of was going back and forth. And I finally got to the point where like, I'm done. We're not doing this back and forth because, and I, again, like what you said and asked, I should say, I had to remind myself to be very conscious of like, hey, this is like, an open forum. Everybody's seeing this, don't be the crazy person that, is being belligerent and whatnot. But it did get to a point where I'm like, this is getting ridiculous. And that's where my boundary was like, I'm done. And I immediately texted the person. I said, we need to get on the phone. I'm not going to go back and forth publicly because there's clearly things that need to be straightened out. And so we were able to get on the phone and talk it out. And then there was understanding. But I got to the boiling point of like, no. You're not going to call me out like this and say it's one thing because you're misinterpreting what I was saying. Plus, you don't understand the other things that I'm trying to make a point of. That person zeroed in on one part. And I was just like, dude, like, what are you doing? I was so livid. So yeah, I have been there. I've been there. And you do have to evaluate. You have to evaluate, how much are you going to take? How are you going to handle? I mean, or you can just be crazy and just cuss somebody out, which I've seen too. And I'm like, I'm just not going to handle it that way. Because you do have to think about the repercussions. You have to think about the consequences. I mean, how many times do you see people fly off the handle and then they want to do that? I apologize. I mean, you see this all the time on Twitter with politicians. I did not, or I apologize for my action. And I'm just like, okay, so you didn't think about this then.
Yeah.
And those are the kinds of things where I'm like, I really know. Summer and I talk about this very often, where you got to take a step back. And it's in those moments. And I know Summer and I have had many conversations offline about like, what would you do? What do you think? Because sometimes we're so in our own bubble. We're so in our own world. It helps to get that outsider's perspective. Like, am I being ridiculous here? Or do you see what I'm seeing? Right?
Yeah, absolutely. And and that's what I love about Jen and I, because we can be honest, and there is that objectivity, right? Where we can tell each other, well, maybe your perception was, or maybe their perception was, because again, as we said, it's okay to take into consideration the perception, right, of somebody else. As you had mentioned, Jen, that's really important. But here's the thing. I really believe that you have to know your own boundary scale and your values, and where do those values rate in regards to your boundary scale. So let's talk prevention.
Yes.
Because I think prevention is really important when you're here, when you're listening to Mel Robbins and she's saying, tell that person, if they're being disrespectful, tell that person. Well, here's the thing. When she says showing up late, if that's on your value, if you like, making sure that you're prompt and you have that expectation of others, then you're going to put that out there. And this is where prevention comes into play, is that if there are certain things that really just kind of make you bubble over and just kind of really get under skin, such as talking over you, that's a trigger point for you, Jen.
Oh, yeah.
One of the things you could say is, one of the guidelines here in the group, or if you're leading a group, or if you're leading a conversation, is let's talk one at a time. I am so happy to give you the platform. I'm so happy to give you the stage, but let's just not talk over each other, and really kind of be preventative in relation to how you're going to proceed, or what you're telling people, or what you're presenting, because that's going to really help in regards to setting those boundaries early on and being preventative.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times you won't even have to tell somebody to do that, because they already know that about you.
Yeah.
It's
yeah,
like,
you have to set that expectation.
Exactly. Right. So it's like, Jen, Jen likes to be on time. So if you're not going to be on time, she's going to get a little miffed by that. Right. And
Yeah,
so it's like, that's one of the things. That's one of your big triggers, right?
Oh God. Yeah. Let's move on.
She's already getting triggered by it, just talking about it.
Oh my God. If I shut down, I'm trust me, I am trying to mitigate the wrath. So that's what's happening. If I how come you're not, what's wrong? How come you're not talking? It's like, trust me, it's for your safety.
So, so we are talking prevention. We're talking about boundary setting. We're talking about knowing your values. We're talking about you can boundary set when you know your values and you're really clear with those. And even though you might have learned something, or culturally learned something, or been, conditioned to learn something, and your behavior has become cyclical and you just don't feel right about that any longer, it's okay to change that. And if people don't understand that, that's okay too. And sometimes you have to explain or be more assertive, or you have to know your own limits. What are your limits? What's acceptable and not acceptable? And that's where really what comes into play is knowing your values and being clear about what you're going to be really rigid regarding in regards to your values and your boundaries, or what you're going to be more flexible on. Because I think that, and that's a term used in psychology all the time, especially when it comes to talking and setting boundaries, is those rigid and flexible boundaries. What do they look like for you? What are you willing, and where are you okay to show that flexibility, and where are you not okay and say, I'm drawing the line right here, right now. This is not okay. And then sometimes even with people that you continually try and set those boundaries with, and they continue to do A, B, or C, and you've asked them numerous times, maybe it's time to look at, this is not working, and it's time to shut this down. It's time to either go and talk to that person once again, or set up guidelines. So when you do talk to them, when you're going to bow out and say, hey, you know what, this is where I'm going to take a step back. And this is where my comfort zone is. And if, another practice could be, if they're not getting it, it might be time to just shut it down and say, you know what, this isn't working. This relationship is not working, whether it be a friend, a relative, or otherwise. I mean, I know I had to do that with a very close relative, and there were years that went between us. And finally that person came back and said, I understood. I understand what I did. I understand it. And I won't do this again, because I want to have a relationship with you. And to me, that was really important, because I love that person, but are they loving me back? Are they nurturing me? Are they being respectful of my boundaries?
Yeah, I love this part, because I think sometimes, especially the way that we've grown up, or the way we've been modeling after our parents, whatever it is, I think sometimes we have that guilt. Well, I just have to make it work, especially with relatives, right? Family members. But I think it's important for us to realize that to stay healthy mentally, emotionally, all those different things, that you have permission to say no. And I call it love from afar. There's just going to be some people who will not respect you. And they most likely have issues that they got to deal with. And that's not for you to fix.
Absolutely.
Right? It's like the best that you can do is at least bring it to the surface and make that person mindful and aware of, like, hey, this is how I'm feeling when we're dealing with each other, or when we're hanging out or interacting. Like I always feel disrespected and have examples when this is happening, or when I hear this is how I feel, blah, blah, blah. But like Summer said, there might be a situation where like you've done all you can. Yeah. Why choose to continue to allow that to happen to you? You have to, just like she said, shut it down. And I think it's important for us to realize that that's okay. Yeah. And to release that guilt and forgive yourself, because some people we will hang on just to save face and to, okay, I don't want to make any, ruffle the feathers and, all that kind of stuff. But you're the one that's going to stay in that yucky, cringy space that we've been talking about. And why would you want to live like that? So, right. I mean, so just understand that there's going to be some times when you've done all you could and it's time to say goodbye and put an end to it. And you just never know. You never know where life will take you. Maybe that person will come to and then have an epiphany, and maybe they won't. But either way, have peace within yourself, knowing that you did what you could and you said something about it. And that at that point, you have to just release it.
Oh, absolutely. I've had both happen, Jen. So I've had both very close relatives, and that happened. And a couple of things happened there. And that was such a great, a great example of what we're talking about here when you're talking about, having this happen and it being somebody close and all of that modeling. Here's the thing, and something that Mel mentioned in her video is the pressure. So you can have what's called layered, like layered, what did I write down? So kind of a layered impact, right? So that layered impact could be that you're trying to set your boundaries, and yet there are people coming out of the woodwork saying, hey, no, you can't do this. You can't do this to this person because they're your A, B, or C in regards to a relative, right? And yet it takes a very strong person to say, but I'm not going to be treated this way. Mm-hmm. And I don't care if it's from you or you or you can't pressure me into feeling this way, because they don't know the relationship you might have had with that relative. They don't know the backstory. They don't know every detail. So you set your own terms and be okay with, and this is where you have to stand and be okay with, when you do set those terms and those boundaries, you're going to have to be okay with those other people potentially leaving your life or potentially not engaging. And when I did that and I said, I'm okay with this, I was okay with the rest of it, because it was my life, my journey. And one person may have come back, one person may not have, and that was okay with me. But I felt secure in knowing this was the right decision for me. I didn't bend. I wasn't flexible. I was rigid about that because it had been going on. And I really wanted to stop that cycle. So if you really want to stop a cycle, if you really want to align with your own values, if you really don't want to put your values in jeopardy, then you're going to be okay with setting firm boundaries. If you want to be a little more flexible and reevaluate that later, that's fine. But you determine what your boundary scale is. So with that said, I think we've covered a lot here in relation to, boundaries, settings, giving the example, by citing Mel Robbins. I think she had a lot of great things to say, and this started out this conversation. But with that, it's a process. Just know that it's a process. But once you start that process and you start feeling better about yourself and where you are and your values and your own boundary scale, it becomes more clear about what you have to do.
Yep.
Awesome. All right. And everybody, if you have any questions for us, please DM us your questions. Number one. Number two, if you missed any of this, and again, this is about feeling disrespected. What do you do in those situations? Your boundary setting. Go to our YouTube page. We ask us one favor today. Go to our YouTube page, subscribe, and turn on notifications. That's what we'd love for you to do. All right, folks. And you can normally find that in our bio. So if we have a bio, we probably have a link to our YouTube page. So go find it, check it out, go subscribe, and turn on those notifications. All right, everybody. All right, Jen, we're ready to go. Sign off. Yep. All right. Yep. Take care, everybody. Ciao.
Thanks.